Welcome back to another episode of the Format Podcast. Today, we're jam-packed with guests for you. First, to talk all things NFL, we've got Jacksonville Jaguars beat writer for the Florida Times-Union John Reid. Next up, to discuss all things NBA, of course, is our official hoops analyst of the Format Podcast, Andy Noel. And finally, to talk college football, we've got host of the Always Irish Notre Dame Football Podcast, John. But before we go ahead and get to all of that, I know you can't wait. We got to knock out the particulars. I'm always available on social media. You can catch me on Twitter at Bruce F.A. Hope. That's at Bruce F.A. Hope. You can catch me on Instagram at The Format Podcast. That's at The Format Podcast. And, of course, we're available via email, theformatpodcast@outlook.com. You can reach me by any one of those means. You can tell me you love the show. We'd love that. You can tell me you hate the show. Wouldn't love that quite as much, but it lets me know you're listening. And you can suggest topics that you want to discuss. You can suggest if you have ideas for segments for the show. You can tell me I'm the biggest idiot talking sports. Just tell me why. I don't care what you do. Just love the interaction. Now, if you like the show, make sure you head over to iTunes and give us that 5-star rating. The more of those we get, the higher we rise in the rankings. Also, if you like the show here on YouTube, make sure you click that subscribe button in the lower right corner of your screen and click that bell so that you can make sure you're alerted of any new content that we put out there for you. So with that, sit back, relax, and listen up to episode 78 of The Format. So joining us today on the Format Podcast to talk all things NFL, especially the Jacksonville Jaguars, is Jags beat writer for the Florida Times-Union, John Reid. John, how you doing? It's been a long time. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Well, good to be on. It's been a long season, obviously.
Absolutely. So let's, of course, start with your wheelhouse, and that's the Jags. We see that they've pretty much stripped down the team, done their best to get rid of all the big contracts. They look for all intents and purposes like they are trying to be competitive, but it's not working out that way on the field. Tell us, what are you hearing about what the Jags' plans for the future are, and what are you seeing?
Well, plans for the future is that they're trying to win games. I mean, at least that's what they're saying publicly. But let's be facts are facts. They're rebuilding. They got a young roster, youngest roster in the league. And you build a football team in the off season. And a guy that's most important person in that franchise to build that roster is your general manager. Between last season and up through the draft, somewhere the decision was made that we're going to go with a different culture, number one, and we're going to go with a situation where we're going to build this football roster around young players. And when they made that decision based on that we needed to get a different attitude, so to speak. I think that we were going to move some of these veterans, regardless of what the impact was or what the impact has been. We needed to clear some space off the cap. But my opinion of that is this, man. Nothing wrong with trying to change your culture. Nothing wrong with moving players who don't want to be in your franchise like a Yannick. The problem I have with the Jaguars is that you can't make that amount of you can't have that many you can't move that many veterans
Mm-hmm.
and don't pay a price at the end. And the
Mm-hmm.
price paying at the end is what we're seeing on the football field right now. You can't thrust these guys who I mean SEC is a great conference, but CJ Henderson don't get matchups week to week in the SEC as he's getting right now. You know, you go up against Keenan Allen, he's a baller. He's
Mm-hmm.
an all pro. He knows the tricks. And that's the difference between college and pros. These guys know the different type of the tendencies or whatever to get themselves open, take advantage of your weaknesses that you haven't developed yet. And the problem right now is that I think the Jaguars got some great young players, but they're not ready to play that elevated role that they're being thrust upon right now. You know, I think Devon Hamilton is a good player. I mean, he was at Ohio State, and he had a good game this past Sunday against the Chargers. But he got 9 games to go, man. And when you're young, you can have a great game in week 4 and a terrible game in week 5.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when experience plays in. And this team right now do not have the experience to compete not only in the AFC South, but to compete with the rest of those teams on their schedule. This team cannot compete against Green Bay. You
Right.
know, I mean that not having that experience is just it's why this team is 1-6. I mean, and the issue I have with Dave Caldwell is that the general manager is that you have to have a plan. You can't just arbitrarily decide after 6-10 season that we need to do this, we need to do that, and don't have a 3-year to 4-year plan. Because when you make one mistake, they made 2 mistakes at quarterback. Whenever you make a mistake at quarterback, you probably put yourself probably about 3 to 4 years
Behind that
back.
8 ball, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And not only has he made a mistake at quarterback, he's making mistakes with the overall way to rebuild. You reload, you don't rebuild. I mean, when you go from I know all the people talk about, we always talk about that 217 team. Well, if you're making decisions based on a team that went to the AFC Championship game and almost made it to the Super Bowl, then you should have been, and it doesn't matter about Tom Coughlin and all that. You should have had a plan in place that we got to start, and even during that season, we got an issue right now that we could lose Jalen, in which they
Mm-hmm.
could have.
Right.
We got an issue at safety, which is why they drafted Ronnie Harrison. And you got to start plugging the dots 2 years before the dot become a problem.
Right. Well,
and this franchise hadn't done that.
Let me interrupt you there. First, when we referred to that 2017 season where the Jags made the AFC title game and were really into the fourth quarter still in that game,
Yep.
I try to tell all these Jags fans that was fool's gold. Deshaun Watson was hurt that year. Andrew Luck was hurt that year. So the 2 best quarterbacks in the division were both hurt, and that led to the Jags being able to win that division. Now, I had somebody tell me, well, those 2 quarterbacks being hurt didn't have anything to do with the Jags beating the Steelers twice that year. So I get it. And the Jags defense was great that year, but it was fool's gold overall. So to see Jags fans still hanging on to that is crazy to me. But that brings me around to the next point. You talk about the most important position in sports. You talk about the quarterback position you mentioned. Gardner Minshew, at least for right now, is clearly the guy. The Jags may or may not be bad enough to get their hands on Justin Fields or Trevor Lawrence. The question is, if they're bad enough to do it, do they do it? Or do they maybe trade the pick and really try to build the team up?
Well, if they're in position to draft 1 or 2, that's the answer to Gardner Minshew as far as being their future. You know, his future is based on one loss record this season. If
Mm-hmm.
they're in draftable position to be in a top 3 pick,
Mm-hmm.
that logic says they have to go get a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Garner Minshew, you know, he's a 6th-round pick. You know, I mean, he had a great season coming in for Nick Foles last
Mm-hmm.
season. But over his body of work, and he has now a body of work. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, he has last season, but he
Mm-hmm.
has 7 games under his belt. He's not the book is on him.
Mm-hmm.
You blitz, you put a middle rush on him, and you close the pocket and you force him to make him uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
and you rattle him, and he's going to make the same mistakes, which
Mm-hmm.
basically what he's done. You know, when he scrambles, there's nothing wrong with scrambling, but when you scramble and you don't look down and see those receivers getting open, that's a problem. And also is another problem that he has is that you, you have to be accurate. You gotta step into your throw. A lot of those throws that he's having problems with right now, when he's getting flushed out of the pocket, he's flushing. I mean, he's throwing off his back foot, and those are technique flaws. But every team from Miami, all the last 5 games they played, they're basically taking advantage of those same mistakes that he's making. I wouldn't say that's regression, but that's not franchise quarterback. If you look at that game last Sunday with Los Angeles, you can see Justin Haber.
Justin
He's
Herbert,
throwing
yeah.
the ball in a tight window,
Mm-hmm.
a tight window throw.
Mm-hmm.
Garner doesn't have that ability. That's a born ability.
Mm-hmm.
You can throw that ball even when the receiver is covered and is in there. And repeatedly, he ain't just did this Sunday. He's been doing it since he's been in the starting lineup.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the skills. And another thing is you can't take away he's 6'6".
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Justin Herbert's a big guy.
Yeah.
So all right. So let's move on from the Jags because it doesn't matter of fact, before we move on from the Jags quickly, I read before the season started the possibility of if they could get Trevor Lawrence in the draft, also trying to lure Dabo Sweeney out of Clemson to come coach the team. Have you heard anything like that or any possibility of changes in the coaching of the Jaguars?
Well, he's being evaluated. I mean, if this team goes 3-13, there's no way that he's gonna keep his job.
Mm-hmm. Do
I
they have
don't
their
think.
eye on anyone?
Well, I don't know. I mean, no, that'd be speculative at boys. I don't think Dabo is going to leave Clemson to come to Jacksonville, even if they get his quarterback. I actually don't think the Jaguars would have enough money to pay him.
Mm.
I don't think they can outspend Clemson, to be
Yeah,
honest.
you gotta buy him out, then you still have to pay him. Yeah,
But you know how much he's making, though. He's making about
I think he
12.
make $9 million a year or something like that.
Marone ain't making nowhere near that.
Mm.
So that's the difference in the Jaguar franchise and the Dallas Cowboys, too.
Mm.
I think that, and I say this very brief, but I think that Shad Khan has to get he's got to get more involved with his franchise. I mean, even though something that was said today by Marone said that he speaks to Shad weekly, he spoke to him yesterday. So it gives this idea that he is in tune of what's going on. But from a public standpoint, and what this fan base is upset about is they feel that he hadn't taken hold of his franchise. You can't make promises at the end of seasons when it's 5-11 and 6-10, see the same mistakes happen and no changes is made. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but these guys, that let's be honest, and I said this to you earlier. If you look at their schedule, they got 9 games to go. I would give them 2 potential winnable games, which would be Houston and Minnesota. After that, they're not going to beat Baltimore. I mean, they're not going to beat
Right.
Green Bay. They're not
Right.
going to beat Tennessee. They're not going to beat any of those teams. So they got one win right now. They 1-6. The best this team can do is 3-13. He's gone five. I mean, since 2017, he's gone 5-11, 6-10, and looks like he's facing a 3-13 season. There's no, if he remains coach, they're not going to be able to sell tickets in Jacksonville. And it's not going to matter if they get Trevor Lawrence or whoever. Whatever going on here in Jacksonville with Coach Doug Marrone, it's broken. It's not working. It's not. It's time to move on. I mean, basically, it's time to move on now. You know, and this, whether Dabo or whoever, they got to go out and get a coach that can relate to the younger players, that has a track record, more of an offensive-minded situation, and get this franchise on track. You know, if not, the losing is going to continue. So it doesn't matter if Trevor Lawrence is a great quarterback, but if you look at that Clemson team, he's got weapons everywhere.
All over the place. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
There's no weapons in Jacksonville.
Right.
So they gotta, it's still gonna be, even if they get the number 1, number 2 pick, it's still got to be pieces put in. And you don't want to have the same guy putting in the pieces who's been putting in the pieces since 2013 and it hadn't worked. So you gotta make the tough decision for this franchise to move forward. You know?
Right. So let's move away from Jacksonville now. Let's talk about another sorry team in the NFL, the Dallas Cowboys. They are about as bad can be. They're bad on offense. They're historically bad on defense.
But they lost their quarterback, man. You can't say.
Well, the problem with that argument is, and I've had this with a lot of people, even when they had their quarterback, they still weren't winning. They were just putting up more points and yards. So they still as bad can be. What do you have to say about that? Is it time that Jerry Jones gives up running the entire show, gets a real GM in there? And is it also time that he fires Mike McCarthy? I know they're only, 5-6 games into the season, but it seems like he's already lost the team. Or at the very least, do they fire Mike Nolan, defensive coordinator? What are you hearing out of Dallas?
Well, I say this about Dallas. Dallas is going through just like Jacksonville. The only difference is Dallas is an exposed team. Everybody in the country either love them or hate them. Dallas hadn't made good personnel decisions in probably the last 6-7 years, you know. And whatever Jerry's doing is not working. Just like Shad in Jacksonville is not working. But they're America's team, and they get all this exposure, and all they do is let their fans down every year. They don't have a defense. That's the problem. They could score 30 points and still give up 40. The problem is they can't stop anybody. Another problem is that pieces is in there. They got pieces on that team that's talented, but the pieces are not fitting. They haven't fit in years, to be honest. And they just like another bad football team. But since they're the Dallas Cowboys, and they get all this exposure,
right?
That there's always this hope that they're going to get to the Super Bowl and all that. And then when you look at the flaws of that roster, the decisions that's being made, they got the money. They like the Yankees of the NFL, but they spend their money in the wrong areas that need to be improved. They just bring in guys and they don't fit. How can you have a football team that's giving up probably over 30-something points a game, over 400 yards, and expect to win? The only fortunate thing about Dallas is that they in an extremely weak division.
Yeah.
But when you can't score against the Washington team,
yeah, it's bad. Bad.
A problem. And just like you say, let me add this to you. It might be time for Jerry to give the team up and just allow his son to run the team, you know?
I agree.
The glory is gone. I think Jerry right now is just in it for just the love of the glory.
I think, I was about to say he's an egomaniac, and that's really what it is. But let me ask you this: with Dallas, right? First thing we saw, even before he got hurt, was the prolonged contract negotiations with Dak Prescott, i.e., he thought he was worth more than they did, and I told you about this since last season when you and I talked about it. But even beyond that, if they continue to be this bad, and they are one of the worst teams in the league, do you think they get one of those young quarterbacks out of the top 2 or 3 picks? Because if it was me, I would. Then I wouldn't have to worry about the contract negotiations with Dak.
Well, in essence, they might have helped themselves not giving him a full.
Exactly.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why would they not? If they were to sit there and be at the number 1 pick,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there'd be no doubt whatsoever that they would pull that trigger and get Trevor Lawrence.
I would take Justin Fields, but that's a different argument.
Yeah, well, I mean, either one is both of them great.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
But I think they would be foolish not to.
Right.
You know? I mean, we don't know what. I mean, Dak Prescott is a great quarterback. You know, but come on, man, this is a performance-based business. And
exactly.
He's coming off a major injury here.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Like Shannon Sharp likes to say, a lot of empty calories. You know, he's throwing the ball all over the yard and doing a whole lot, but it's not resulting in wins. So
there's no love loss in the NFL. You don't have a line. You don't have allegiance.
Exactly. All right. So moving on from the Cowboys, we've talked a lot about the quarterback position today, and let's be real. We are in an era where defense is pretty much legislated out. We've seen it in the NBA. We also see it in the NFL. You know, the leagues don't want too much defense because to the lay fan, it's not exciting. So we're seeing offensive production almost like never before. We're seeing, for the most part, young quarterbacks really walk into the league, and their coaches are bringing a lot of concepts that they ran in college with them, allowing them to be successful early. What do you think of all these young quarterbacks that are just coming in and doing it? Your Joe Burrows, your Justin Herbert that we talked about earlier, your Kyler Murrays. You know, we're seeing, of course, Lamar Jackson. We're seeing a lot of young quarterbacks really have much more success than we've ever seen so early in their careers before. What do you think about that? Where do you think the league is heading?
I think if you're a fan, you like offense, and you like the guys putting the ball up 40 times a game or more, then this is the league for you. For me, I'm an old school guy. I like seeing the running back get the handoff for 2. I like to see defense. I like to see the cornerback use a little physicality and don't get called for pass interference.
Right.
But just like the NBA, scoring is great. But hey, I used to like the Knicks used to mix it up with anyone in the physical play when they played Jordan.
Right.
But that's the way this is the society that we live in now.
Yeah.
That you have to put points on the board. You have to score. You have to make it exciting. And I think that's the era that we're in right now. And some of these the quarterbacks, they're good. The kid in Los Angeles is a quality. He's a good quarterback. Joe Burrow can make any throw, all that. But, when you can't touch the receiver.
You can't touch the receiver. You can't hit the quarterback. Things get a whole lot easier, don't they?
You can't tackle.
Right.
You can't do this. So that's why they're putting that ball up 40-something times and scoring these, 30 points, 34 averages and all these kind of things. But to me, let me say that, man, I just wish football could go back a little bit to the football of the 80s. I won't even take it back to the 70s. Give me back the football of the 80s where the Lawrence Taylors and the defensive guys, and you will sit there with your popcorn on Monday night. You're going to see some smash mouth. You're going to see some good tackling. You're going to see an offense that have to work to score.
Yeah.
Not just putting the ball up 3 times and like 28 points, those kind of things.
Given
my choice, we lost it.
Given my choice, I say 90s, early 2000s. You see those Steelers defenses. You see the great Ravens defense, the greatest defense of all time, by the way. But, you see those. But, huh?
I don't know about that. Those old Pittsburgh Steelers teams.
All right, we'll have this debate
Steel
another
curtain
day.
was something else back in the day, man.
We'll have this debate another day. But I mean, I look at it and I say one of the biggest things that you would hear as argument to that, obviously the quote unquote player safety, which I don't believe the NFL really cares about as much as they say, but that's a different story. It's more the premise of you don't want star quarterbacks getting hurt, so you got to protect them because they're a cash cow. So, you know, you don't want to be in a position where those guys are getting hurt and can't be on the field. So I get that. But John, we'll go ahead and wrap it there for this episode. Thanks so much for taking the time to come in and give us some insight on the Jags and talk to us about some NFL football.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot for having me on.
All right. See you next time. You know who it is and you know what it is. When we talk basketball on the Format Podcast, you know who comes in to do it best. We got with us AAU coach and official Format Podcast basketball analyst, Andy Noel. Andy, what's up? And thanks for joining again, man.
Bruce, always a pleasure, my man.
All right. So we're gonna get to some topics on a shorter NBA segment this time. We're not gonna go all day like they're used to, but we're definitely gonna hit some key points of this offseason. So the season is done. The Lakers are the champions. LeBron has number 4, but let's move on from that. We're actually not going to talk LeBron James this time. Can you believe it?
Phooey.
All right. So on the player side, because we're going to talk a little bit of players and coaches today. Number 1, will Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek freak, force a trade at some time this season?
If he's smart, he will. Things aren't going to get any better over there. And listen, it's the new NBA landscape, and people are doing it. I think there's a gentleman way to do that if they're smart, right? There's a way that everybody can walk away from this happy. You've got too many bad contracts. You've got Eric Bledsoe. Eric Bledsoe is probably the biggest issue there. And you've got a bunch of pieces that don't necessarily work. When your best player isn't necessarily the most skilled player, sometimes that causes some problems, and that's really what you're looking at. If I'm Milwaukee, I will look at who has the best package and say, okay, let's make a deal.
So you know where I am on this. I'm kind of old school in the fact that I like to see an organization build around their star player. I like to see that star player keep hammering away until he can get through, and if he doesn't, he doesn't, right? But at the same time, in the ring culture we're in, if you don't win, then it greatly denigrates your legacy. So the thing is, Giannis has said publicly that he wants to stay in Milwaukee. He wants to win there. He's not trying to roll out and join up with a super team or anything like that. What do you think that says about his chances of leaving? Do you think maybe he's got his agents working it on the backside while he says what he needs to say to look good on the front?
Look at the look on his face when his brother showed up with his championship ring.
Mm-hmm.
That'll tell you everything you need to know.
Fair enough. Moving on from the East to the West, the Clippers. Now, we know the Clippers were a major disappointment this year. They were the team that I picked and a lot of others picked to get to the finals and win the championship, just based off of what Kawhi Leonard had finished doing last year, the type of player he is, the type of roster they put together specifically designed to give LeBron James trouble. But obviously it never materialized. They got knocked out after blowing a 3-1 lead in the conference semis to the Denver Nuggets. So the question now is, I heard Shaquille O'Neal, he's on the record. He's a Hall of Famer. He's a champion, a former MVP, and now an analyst of note who says that if the Clippers want to win, they need to get rid of Paul George and let Kawhi Leonard be the man. First issue with that is, for me, you can't win in the modern NBA without multiple superstars. Of course, exception being Toronto last year, but let's be real, if Golden State was healthy, Toronto doesn't win that championship. Regardless, the title is a title. What do you think about Shaq's commentary about Paul George needing to go so Kawhi can be the man if the Clippers want to win a title?
Big respect for Shaq always, right? Shaq is from my era. Shaq is a beast on court. That take makes absolutely no sense. Kawhi Leonard needs help, right? Kawhi Leonard, he proved it down the stretch. You and I have talked about this before. Kawhi Leonard made a bunch of big noise and wasn't able to deliver down the stretch. Paul George wasn't the reason why he was missing those mid-range shots. Paul George wasn't the reason why he wasn't getting his teammates involved. Paul George wasn't the reason why he wasn't able to deliver when the game counted, right? Paul George is a beneficiary. Benefits his game because it gives him the room that he needs to play that ISO game. What they really need is a Chris Paul / Rajon Rondo type point guard, somebody that can settle the offense down and kind of say, hey, let me distribute. You'll get your ISO, you'll get your touches, but everybody else has got to get involved, right? To a degree, using an analogy. Scotty, they need someone to be Scottie Pippen to Michael Jordan, right? Mm-hmm. Where although Kawhi is going to come out here and get his numbers, Scottie Pippen is going to be the guy that gets everybody else involved and keeps the floor balanced. They need that. I think Ty Lue also, with his cachet, he'll be able to add a measure of balance in that offense as well. Given his experience with LeBron James and Kawhi and Kyrie Irving. But getting rid of Paul George solves nothing, right? Because that productivity, who's going to make it up, right? There's a lot of reasons why they lost to the Clippers. Paul George is one of them, right? I forgot what's their big man's name. Don't remember.
Zubac.
Exactly, right? He you know how many bunnies he missed, point blank layups he missed against Denver? Harrell, right? He just completely disappeared, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lou Williams completely disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
If all those things don't happen, we're having a different conversation. So making it a Paul George problem, to me, just seems like lazy analysis.
Fair enough. So next, staying in the West and especially in the Pacific Division, what do you see Golden State doing this offseason? We're kind of hearing things about them possibly trading that number 2 pick. Obviously, we know it's been reported by multiple reputable journalists that they have interest in Giannis. What do you think is their plan?
Golden State's in a pretty decent position. So, because the reality is, so let's just look at it from 10,000 feet up. No matter what happens at this point, their legacies are firm, right? Their legacies are established. They are who they are. 3 championships in 5 attempts, dominant 5-year run. They've done a lot. Now, let's just say Milwaukee decides, okay, we're not going to be able to keep this guy, re-sign him. We got moves to make. They packaged that pick with Andrew Wiggins, and Giannis heads over there, and it's going to be a nightmare in the West.
Mm-hmm.
They keep their pick. Go ahead.
No, that is really a scary thought because, as we've talked about, you have the floor being spread by Stephen Clay. You have the playmaking duties that Giannis is doing in Milwaukee taken up by Draymond. So Giannis, let's say he gets to Golden State, has nothing to do but lower his head and go and dunk on everything moving. And
in an open space,
right,
off of switches.
Right. And then on the defensive end, he can play a lot of help defense. It would be scary for a lot of other teams in the West. I'm not sure they want to see that if he gets out there.
You've got an athletic rim protector who can essentially get from end to end in about 6 to 10 steps, something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And can dunk and has arms as long as the Milky Way. So if they do that, that's one thing. If they get James Wiseman, who I've heard over the weekend is being viewed as a more athletic David Robinson.
Yeah, but listen, people say a lot of things because David Robinson was extremely athletic. So to say that's really iffy. I saw a post online that said like 72% of basketball fans think DeMar DeRozan was better than Joe Dumars. So I don't believe a whole lot of what I hear.
No. So just in case, I should have qualified that. I was listening to NBA radio and I was listening to Sam Mitchell. Sam Mitchell, the ex-coach and NBA analysis. Listen, I don't know. It's and not in rank, but in terms of guys who I listen to for their basketball analysis, Rick Bucher, Sam Mitchell, Doug Gottlieb, maybe another two. So what Sam Mitchell said, I'm quoting him, he's a slightly more athletic David Robinson and taller. I said, if Golden State grabs him, and if he's only blocking shots, grabbing rebounds, and setting picks, they're going to be a dominant team. So it's outside of that, and the other option is drafting a LaMelo for grabbing a LaMelo ball for.
He doesn't fit. He needs the ball all the time.
For the Knicks.
Oh, okay.
And grabbing Mitchell Robinson off of their hands, right? Off of the Knicks' hands, and maybe somebody else, because the Knicks got like 13, 14, maybe 18 power forwards, right? So the Golden State Warriors are in pretty decent position, right, in terms of what options they can go in. And I think, given the amount of time that everybody had to rest, I think they are, depending on, and even if they just stand pat and grab that pick, they're in good shape, right? They got length, they got versatility. Another one that I'm thinking about as well is trading that pick for the Holiday kid that used to play for them. I forgot what his name is. Might have been not Justin Holiday, the other Holiday. Yes, actually Justin Holiday and Miles Turner. They get Justin Holiday and Miles Turner. That is a nightmare for the league, right? That gives them, again, versatility, shot blocking, and athleticism. So Golden State's in a pretty decent position.
Fair enough. On the coaching side, there's been some interesting hires. One I thought was pretty interesting was the Pelicans getting Stan Van Gundy. And that comes to me with a few questions. Number one, is he a coach with his old school mentality? Can he connect with younger players? That old school vibe might not resonate the same way, even though we know that he knows his basketball. What do you think about that?
So I was listening to, and I read a couple of articles on that hire. And initially, he wasn't all that gung ho about taking the job. He was really cavalier and really kind of blasé about taking it. So I think he did some thinking. I'm not necessarily one of the biggest JV Stan Van Gundy fans, but I do know that he knows his basketball. And I think the move is smart for the organization because it gives them an opportunity, especially for Zion, to understand how to play the game, right? To be able to be taught about playing the game by one of the game's thinkers, right? Because oftentimes this gets discounted and dismissed, but what makes certain players really good is the coaching they had at their fundamental stage, right? The early parts of their life, who can teach them a basketball philosophy and help them understand the game at a cerebral level, which makes playing the game physically more easy. So I think just from a Zion standpoint alone, I think this is a good move. But time will tell, right? He's going to make them play defense. He's going to make them. They will play hard, right? They will respect him, and you will see a level of discipline that probably before.
The only thing I'm thinking about, all that makes sense, but on an offensive side, in terms of a player like Lonzo Ball, who still is not great at actually running an offense. His whole thing is get up the floor quick, get the ball out of his hands quickly, outlet up the floor. He still is not, very good in terms of what he can do or can't do in the half-court sets. How do you think he's going to be able to deal with a coach like Stan Van Gundy?
So at this point, he doesn't really have a choice. I think he's in a contract year, as a matter of fact. He's going to have to figure it out, right? I think one of the things with Lonzo, if you analyze this game, you'll see that the thing about him, what made him more effective in college for the 1 year he played in college as well in high school. He can get the ball up pretty quickly. Right? He can really move and he can make things happen really quickly. He's a good transition player. And today's pace and space environment, that works out really nicely. The problem is he can't really penetrate from the 3-point line down. He can't really get into the lane and create. And I would imagine that he's working on that, but I also can imagine that, Stan is going to figure out from an offensive standpoint how to position him the best, right? Don't forget, Stan Van Gundy was getting Hedo Turkoglu shots, right? When he was down in Miami, right? They were playing a 4-out, 1-in offense with Dwight Howard manning the middle, and that team was incredible. Yeah, what did I say? Sorry,
Miami.
In Orlando, right? So. He can get creative offensively, right? He can get guys some shot. Rashard Lewis, right? Those guys. He can develop players, especially with what he has. But guys have got to do their parts as well. I think Lonzo doesn't have a choice but to buy in. He's in a contract year, and the inconsistency that has been consistent in his play ever since he got into the league is glaring. He's got no choice.
Fair enough. Second interesting coaching hire, the Pacers hired Raptors assistant Nick Bjorkgren. Now, they say proximity to excellence doesn't necessarily mean excellence. We know that Nick Nurse is an outstanding coach. The question is, do we know anything about this guy, Bjorkgren, and do we think that he's going to be any better than Nate McMillan as Pacers head coach? And I guess the biggest question is, are they going to be good enough to try and keep Oladipo there?
I think Oladipo. So I've heard this as well. The hope is Oladipo's worth his value has decreased quite a bit. Right now, he's starting to become viewed as the off-injured player, right? Who is expecting a big payday. Despite not necessarily having the resume to warrant that. But I can't really tell what that move is about, right? Nate McMillan essentially, turned, was a miracle worker, especially in the bubble, given, how many players that they had lost, right? They really eked it out, right? Eked out all of that success, and then they fired him. So I don't know what they're trying to do. Like I said, I can't tell whether it's a rebuild or not, because they're not in a position to try to recapture the same magic that Toronto did when Nick Nurse got there. Mm-hmm. So that's a head scratcher as far as I'm concerned. I can't tell you definitively what I think. I don't know this guy. They don't necessarily have the pieces to kind of make a run just yet. They're not even established. I don't even know. I guess culturally they're still kind of putting culture together. Mm-hmm. So I don't really have an answer, to be completely honest.
Right. So last one in this extended coaching hire session. Obviously we got to touch on this. Clippers let Doc Rivers go, and they have hired Tyronn Lue, who is his top assistant. And we know Tyronn Lue has a championship as a head coach of the Cleveland Cavs at LeBron James. So some questions there. Number one, is Ty Lue going to be able to get the Clippers away from all that ISO-heavy offense and really get the team to buy into more ball movement? And two, do we see him being able to hold Kawhi Leonard more accountable in order to quell some of that locker room dissension that's been reported with the Clippers?
I think yes across the board. So before even going to Cleveland the first time, he was viewed as the next guy up. So he was held in pretty high esteem, right, as far as having a coaching mind. I've also heard that he has a tendency to not demonstrate his coaching knowledge to the average person and to the media to the degree that he actually has one. So I think given what we've heard thus far, I think you will see a change in the Clippers. I think the problem with Doc was Doc probably wanted to be more friends with everybody than wanted to be a coach. And sometimes you've got to really be a little bit of a jerk. And from my understanding, I've heard that Ty Lue is willing to be that jerk and has been that jerk a few times. Now, the one blemish that I would assume that we have to look out for is him having those anxiety issues while he was coaching LeBron, right before LeBron, right before LeBron left Cleveland. Having said that, I can imagine how frustrating it might have been to have to deal with those circumstances and all of the championship or bust expectations every season, and every game is is essentially game 7. So I think that's probably, in my mind, probably the only thing that I would be concerned about. Other than that, I think he has the respect. He's won some championships as a player and as a coach. So you have to tip your hat from an accolades and respect perspective. But I think he'll have their ear.
Fair enough. So let's wrap up the segment with this. We're going to do something we call here on the Format Podcast, Buzzer Beater. And along the lines of this particular topic, I'm going to give you a name, and you're going to tell me in 5 seconds or less what's your thought on it. Got it?
Go for it, bro.
All right. First name, Doc Rivers.
Interesting season. We'll have a very interesting season.
All right. Second name, Steve Nash.
Steve Nash is going to also have an interesting season, but I believe he'll be in Coach of the Year contention.
Dead wrong. I think he's going to have big problems with Kyrie Irving.
Okay.
Name
you
number 3. Fair enough. Number 3, Tom Thibodeau, new coach of the Knicks.
Depends on who they get. I believe they're going to get Fred VanVleet, FVV. I think they're going to be in a rebuilding year, but I think they'll be doing culture. I've also heard there's a possibility that Chris Paul ends up there. If Chris Paul ends up there, Carmelo Anthony's coming over there. It's going to be they will at least have the buzz in New York City again.
Shot clock violation. All right. Finally, Billy Donovan, new coach of the Bulls.
That's an interesting one. I've thought about that one a few times. I think they're going to have a pretty mediocre year, and they're going to have to make some changes as far as personnel is concerned. There's a mismatch roster.
Fair enough.
A bunch of players that don't play well together.
Good stuff, Andy. So thank you so much for joining the format, man. I appreciate it. Next time, stick to 5 seconds.
I don't have a clock in front of me. Sorry about that.
All right, boss. Hey, man, you have a good one. Thanks for joining.
Appreciate you.
All right. Joining us for our college football segment of the Format Podcast today. You know him if you've listened to this show before. He is the host of the Always Irish Notre Dame Football Podcast, here to talk some Notre Dame and other college football teams. It is John Kennedy. John, thanks for joining the show.
Always nice to be with you, Bruce.
Absolutely. So let's get right to it, and you know where we're going to start. Notre Dame, number 4 in the nation, just beat Pitt 45-3 at Pitt over the weekend. Some things kind of to look into from this game. Obviously, you see a 45-3 final score, and you're saying to yourself, well, that looked impressive. But if you watch the game, like every other game, there are pluses, there are minuses, things to like, things to dislike. Let's start with the things that maybe we didn't like so much. And that was, number one, Pitt having the number 1 run defense in the country coming into the game. Notre Dame having the number 7 rushing offense in the country coming into the game. Something had to give, and Pitt was really able to control that vaunted Notre Dame rushing attack. What do you say about that? Of course, one of your biggest pet peeves listening to your show is if you're Notre Dame, you have one of the best offensive lines in the country, if not the best offensive line in the country, you have to be able to show it against the better teams and the better defenses. Where are you on what you saw on Saturday?
I was struggling with this. I was putting together my own show, and I was struggling with how to approach that topic. Pitt was the number one rushing defense. We ended up with 115 rushing yards, which is almost double what they give up on average per week. So if you look at it that way, it's decent. I would have felt better 150, 160, 170. At the same time, the argument against that is with Pitt's defense, they're very aggressive. They stack the box. They bring safeties down to help with the run. And the passing game's more available, and it's something that we utilized more this week. So would I have loved to see them run it for more? Yes. But it's hard to complain when you put up 45 points at the end. So I could see that both ways. A part of me says what you said. Okay, they're the number one rushing defense, but we're supposed to have this great offensive line. We're tuning it up for Clemson in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked to see more raw yardage. Now, here's the one thing I do really like, though. Last year, Notre Dame was 65th in the country in gaining first downs on 3rd and 4th and short. That was a big problem last year. This year so far, they're up to 5th. So they're improving on that a lot and had like a half dozen of them in this game. So I do think that bodes well moving forward.
Right. So something you touched on there, obviously the running game struggled in comparison to what they have been doing earlier in the season, but we did see the emergence of the passing game. Ian Book threw for 312 yards, 3 touchdowns. We finally got a Ben Skoranek, the grad transfer from Northwestern, citing 2 catches for 107 yards, 2 touchdowns, big plays all over the place from him. And of course, we saw something that you've really been, kind of on the soapbox about, numerous targets to freshman phenom tight end Michael Mayer. I think they targeted him 8 times. He got 5 catches for 73 yards and a touchdown out of it. How do you feel about the passing game from Notre Dame after this?
I feel better, but at the same time, we were starting from near nothing after Louisville. So feeling better, it's a judge of where you're feeling better from. I mean, it was almost starting from scratch. The passing game it's just going to be an ongoing struggle. Now Notre Dame's down. Their most dynamic, athletic guy, Austin, with the re-injury to his foot, he was the most athletic, dynamic guy we had.
Mm-hmm.
Your speed guy, Lindsey, comes up lame with the hamstring late in the game. So now you're down your most athletic, gifted guy and your speed guy. Everybody else just has to pick up the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
If Ben Skoranek is going to become your go-to guy, so be it, because beggars can't be choosers at this point. This is going to be a work in progress the whole year. It's not ideal, but you got to grow from somewhere. And at least we saw some positive trajectory this week, because you're going to need a passing game to compete with Clemson in 2 weeks.
Right.
So it was encouraging, but it's still a work in progress. And you could tell little things, Bruce. Timing's still off on some of these routes. Book struggles to see some guys or throw the ball before they make their break.
Mm-hmm.
Little nuances that come with a dynamic passing game, we're still working on. Now I almost feel like it's a reset. Lindsey's out. You know what you got. Now you just got to put them in a position to be their best. It ain't Alabama skill talent. It ain't Ohio State skill talent.
Mm-hmm.
Take what we do have and make it work enough to be able to do what you need to do. And the first thing I would do is, like you said, you got 2 tight ends that can catch any ball that's anywhere near them, and Tommy Tremble and freshman Michael Mayer. Those guys should be getting 6 to 8 targets each.
Mm-hmm.
Per game. Crossers over the middle, drag routes, up the seam, you name it. Those guys are going to have to become de facto receivers to me while we work this out.
Fair enough. So I guess that gets us kind of to the next point, and arguably the biggest point, something you and I have been talking about since the offseason. We've got Notre Dame has Georgia Tech upcoming this week, and then the big matchup on the November 7th with Clemson at Notre Dame. And the question again is, what we've seen so far, will it be enough? And will it be enough against Clemson in the context of, when I spoke to Pete Sampson, athletic Notre Dame beat writer, I got the idea from him that kind of while Clemson is still the class of the ACC, they weren't quite as loaded as they've been in the past, specifically 2 years ago when they beat Notre Dame 30-3 in the Cotton Bowl in the playoff, and they had 4 D linemen in that front seven that went on to play in the NFL. They don't quite have that level of talent. Now, they haven't necessarily played the toughest schedule yet, but they have looked really, really impressive so far. From what we've seen, do we think it's going to be enough for Notre Dame to be able to stay close, if not pull off the upset? Is this kind of going to be along the lines of what we saw at Georgia last year? Is this finally the game where Notre Dame gets over the hump?
I think that's your big question. And you know, it's kind of lame, but not at the same time, that every game we've had so far, the eye was always on Clemson the whole time. You're watching those games, we're playing lesser opponents, and everybody's mind is, how's this going to translate on November 7th when we play Clemson? They may be a bit more vulnerable on the defensive side of the ball than when we played them in 2018. And I think you're seeing some of that. You know, even Syracuse scored 3 touchdowns against Clemson. Well, what did we do against them in 2018? We had 3 points, you know? So you look at it that way, but every Notre Dame fan is going to be sitting there with that anxious anxiety. It's the measuring stick. Have we closed the gap at all from 2018 when we played this team? Same quarterback, same coach, same systems. Have we closed the gap? It would be hard for me not to think we can play defense against them. My question is, could this offense do enough to keep them off balance and honest to be able to put up a decent amount of points? I would be bitterly disappointed if our defense wasn't able to at least keep things under control against Clemson and not give up, 38 points, something like that. Offensively, I'm really interested, Bruce. Are we going to be able to run the ball at all against them? Are we going to be able to throw the ball? What's Ian Book going to look like in that big moment? These are all things that have haunted Notre Dame fans in every big game the last handful of years.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much confidence there's going to be, but I know I'm going to be sitting there like, please just let this be the one where we show that we're capable of more.
Well, I tell you what, I guess you should hearken back to 2012 when Mark May said Notre Dame's not even going to get off the bus in Norman, and they went in and beat Oklahoma, I believe, 30-13 when Oklahoma was heavily favored.
See, the problem with what you just said is the best example of that was 2012.
Right.
8 years. Like, that's the problem with this discussion. To me, that was Brian Kelly's most impressive win.
I agree.
Undefeated at night, everything on the line, good team. That's the problem. It's been since then, since we've done it. And so every time these big games come up, all of ND Nation gets kind of tight and nervous. Is this going to be the one where we show we can hang or not?
Right.
So, and the other thing that stinks, Bruce, is you finally get Clemson at home, and now nobody can even go to make it a loud environment or do any of that stuff.
Right.
So that's really unfortunate that we catch them home and you don't get that perceived home field advantage or anything. So, but this is, I said on my show last week, I love that they're the number 1 team. When you play the number 1 team, it's the purest gauge of where you're at you could possibly have. The best and see where we stack up against number 1. Whether it's good, bad, or ugly, it's the purest test that tells you exactly where you're at. And I'm very much looking forward to it.
I hear you. So let's move off of Notre Dame football. You live in Big Ten country. Obviously, the Big Ten started its season this past weekend. How did it feel for you to have the Big Ten back?
Bruce, I got to admit something to you, man. It's nice to have them back.
Mm-hmm.
I really did start missing it.
Yeah.
And maybe some of it is because I am right in Chicago and Big Ten area.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that I miss it because I like it. It's that I miss rooting against them. That's a part of my college football experience is hate watching Michigan, and watching what Ohio State does and that 11 a.m. Big Ten slot every week.
Mm-hmm.
So I really did miss it. It's good to have them back. There's no doubt about it. It's good for the sport that they're back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we saw some interesting stuff week one, starting with Wisconsin's freshman quarterback.
Yeah.
He's almost perfect, and he's a freshman.
Right. 5
touchdowns. Yeah, it's Illinois, but for a freshman, he was 20 of 21, 5 touchdowns. And this is Wisconsin, not Ohio State with all the skill talent. That impressed the hell out of me.
Mm-hmm.
Ohio State does what Ohio State does. That's no surprise to anybody. They're the machine that keeps rolling. I expected more out of Minnesota playing Michigan. I really did. They can't even punt or kick or do anything.
Yeah, I was gonna get to that. So being that you touched on that, now let's take off your Michigan hater hat and let's put your college football analyst hat on. How does Michigan look to you? And I know it's very early, it's one game. And the thing is, it's hard to tell because we've seen Michigan look pretty good for stretches consistently through the Harbaugh era, but then they get smoked by the Buckeyes and then subsequently lose to whoever they play in the bowl game after that. What did you think of what you saw from Michigan?
I thought it was a really good start for them. Taking my rivalry hatred away.
Mm-hmm.
It looked better than I was expecting overall. I think with them, there are some similarities to Notre Dame the last handful of years with Notre Dame and Michigan, where they usually handle the teams they have more talent than. And then when they get matched up in the 1 or 2 games a year with equal or better talent, they struggle. Michigan and Notre Dame have both done that a lot in the last handful of years, even swapping losses with each other in that regard. I think a lot of it's going to have to do with how that quarterback progresses. He's a good physical talent. He can run. He's got a strong arm.
Right.
It's not always the most accurate, but I think that's going to be a big determining factor in how they go or don't go. But it's hard not to like the way they started. They started out sharper and better than I thought with this first game result. But Minnesota was a lot worse than I was expecting them to look too. So maybe give it a few more weeks to get a better gauge. But I was impressed with them. It was a really solid start. I'm sure they're thrilled. It was a really good start.
Okay. And so continuing with the Big Ten, Ohio State, after 1 week, jumps Notre Dame in the polls. Now, we know how good Ohio State is. We know how much talent they have. But after 1 game, they jump 5-0 Notre Dame. How do – not even as a Notre Dame fan, how do you take that? Does that seem reasonable to you? Did they look that much better after 1 week? Or
I think
the Louisville game kind of rearing its ugly head in terms of things here?
I think there's a couple things in play here. Here's how I look at this as the Notre Dame guy. In practicality, them jumping us after 1 week really has little to no big picture consequences. Notre Dame and Clemson are going to take care of that situation in a few weeks no matter what. Maybe take care of it again in the ACC title game. In practical action, I don't think that ranking movement means much. Philosophically and perceptually, I just think it's quite the stark picture of how Notre Dame is perceived versus how Ohio State's perceived. They're getting the benefit of the doubt off their history, how good they are year in, year out. Dame's not, and all it took is 1 week. And get Notre Dame's 5-0 body of work. It tells you where people are in their minds about these two programs. Ohio State's tried, trusted, true, good again, and they're up there. listen, Bruce, there's no Notre Dame fan that could say, if we played Ohio State, I think Notre Dame's better right now.
Right.
You just can't say that. What's hard about it is the 5-0 body of work, and then they just show up and they're instantly ahead of us. I think that's the dynamic people are struggling with.
Mm-hmm.
No way in good faith I can tell you I think Notre Dame's better than that. No.
I agree.
But I thought maybe it might take 2 weeks for them to jump us, not right away.
Mm-hmm.
But the overall rankings, it's not going to matter. Notre Dame's playing for the ACC's playoff spot this year. So Notre Dame and Clemson are going to take care of that. It's more of a perceptual thing of people's buy-in and trust level of Ohio State and not of Notre Dame for the reasons we talk about all the time. People just don't trust Notre Dame.
Fair enough. So let's finally bring it down to the SEC, because as much as I'm not an SEC guy, you can't talk college football without talking them. Let's be realistic here. So what I thought was interesting was Nick Saban's comments this week on defense not being able to win ball games anymore. Do you think that's testament to the changes that we're seeing in terms of the huge drop-off in the defense in the SEC, which, you know, we hear it year in and year out. We hear all the propaganda. They're the closest thing to the NFL, and they play so much defense down south, and you're not seeing that this year. So is that a preemptive strike to defend his conference or defend his program? Or do you think he really believes that the way the rules are and the way the game is played now, that you can't win with defense anymore?
Well, now, wait a second, because now you're flipping the script on me, because I was going to ask you, the guy living down in SEC territory,
right,
what is happening with SEC defenses?
I have no idea. I'm trying to figure out, are the defenses worse? Or is the SEC offensively, coaching-wise, finally catching up to the rest of the country? I mean, you have Lane Kiffin, you have Mike Leach, so you have Jimbo Fisher. You have some guys who have, you know, explosive offensive ability given the talent. But I really have no idea what's kind of gone on with the explosion of offensive production in this conference. And
I can't figure out whether this is COVID. We all didn't have our normal practice, so defenses aren't as tight as they normally are, or is this truly a philosophical shift to more wide open offense, even in that conference that used to be known as hard, physical, tough, deep, running the ball? And maybe the reality is it's a blend of a little bit of all of that, where the rules benefit offenses now. The way all of college football is going, it benefits scoring points and all that. And maybe with COVID, everybody's not as tight defensively because they weren't able to hit all summer. Maybe it's a blend of all those things. But especially when you're used to seeing that in the Big 12 where they score 70 points. Once you start seeing that happen in the SEC, and even with the good teams in the SEC, with Alabama giving up in the mid-40s the other week, I am not used to this. And that was the thing I was going to ask you is it a philosophical shift towards a more wide-open offense, or what?
Well, you know, historically in the SEC, for the most part, Florida's really been the only team that was willing to play that kind of style, from Coach Spurrier with the run and gun, the fun and gun, you know, 5 receiver sets and all that. And then you had Urban Meyer come, and he plays a kind of wide open style. But for the most part, that's not something you've seen in this part of the country, in this college football conference. There's been a lot of 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Like, look at it. LSU has had the same talent level as Alabama and Georgia for years. But the one year they decide to open up offensively and come into the modern era, they set all types of records. Their quarterback wins the Heisman, goes number 1 overall. They win a national championship, 15-0. So I don't know if there's been a philosophical shift. Like I did say, you know, you have some coaches that are more offensive minded now. Of course, you still have Sarkisian is the OC at Bama. You have Lane Kiffin, the head coach at Ole Miss. You have Mike Leach, head coach at Mississippi State. So you have some guys that are innovative offensive minds. But in general, I do find it interesting because despite that, the SEC has held to a certain identity for so long, and it's very interesting. And I'm just I'm really on the fence as to whether or not Saban's commentary was kind of a defense of his conference and what we're seeing, or does he really believe what he's saying?
Yeah, but even Saban, he's opening it up more. I mean, he's got all the toys to play with. I mean, the loss of Waddle's a huge loss, but over the years, he's starting to open it up more. So I think maybe that's just the way things are going. And he's figuring we're going to score anyways. Why take 5 minutes? We'll just throw it down there. I don't know. But you know what else this broader scope conversation makes me think about is with the point totals higher than they've ever been, it's more impressive what Notre Dame's defense has done. They are number one in the country of Power 5 teams that have played more than one game in points allowed. They're giving up under 10 points a game. And in 2020, that's damn hard to do against anybody. I'd say it hasn't been the best competition.
Right.
Everybody's putting up points. You're not good anymore to throw the ball all over.
Right.
So it's a broader scope conversation. But early this year, I'm sitting there looking at these SEC scores going, is this the Big 12? What here? And I think the reality is probably a combination of all the factors we talked about. Schools benefit offense. You know, they're throwing it all over with the point totals. You got COVID. The defenses aren't hitting. I don't know. But it just seems to be the trend. I'll be interested to see next year if this continues or if we have more of a normal spring, summer, if it tightens back up a little bit, teams are able to hit again, tackling's crisper. I don't know, but that SEC being wide open is new to me. I'm not used to it.
No, it definitely looks different. But John, thank you for your time joining the Format Podcast. We'll leave it there. Appreciate
Bruce,
you and definitely looking out.
Hey, we will talk either before or after Clemson.
Absolutely.
And you might want it before so you don't have to deal with me after. I don't. But we will have to reconnect no matter what happens. We got to reconnect on that so we could break it down. It's the purest test you'll ever have of where you are when you play number one, and I'm really excited. Even if it goes bad, I'm excited because then at least I know right where we stand against the best. And that's a healthy test for your program. I embrace it.
Absolutely. All right, John. Well, thanks. You have a good one, and we'll talk again soon.
You as well. Anytime, Bruce. Thanks.